The hedgerows of Normandy were supposed to slow the Americans down. German machine gunners had seen this battlefield before. European armies advanced in recognizable patterns. Men clustered together. Officers pushed frontal pressure. Infantry moved in lines the defenders could predict, calculate, and destroy. But in the summer of 1944, something felt wrong. American riflemen did not move like the armies Germany had fought across Europe. Small groups advanced separately through broken fields. One squad opened fire while another vanished behind tree lines. Soldiers spread wider apart, harder to target, harder to trap. Before German defenders could fully react, artillery shells crashed into positions that had only been discovered moments earlier. Not hours later, minutes later, the battlefield itself appeared to move faster around the Americans. German officers privately described a style of combat they struggled to anticipate. Attacks shifted direction unexpectedly. Pressure emerged from multiple angles. Units that appeared pinned suddenly maneuvered somewhere else entirely. This was not European warfare with American uniforms. It was a different philosophy of war. The enemy's own reports revealed something deeply unsettling. American infantry rarely fought alone. Behind every rifle squad stood radios, truck convoys, artillery networks, engineers, replacement systems, and an industrial structure capable of adapting during battle itself. What happened next forced German commanders to rethink the battlefield entirely, because America's greatest advantage was not courage alone. It was not marksmanship. It was not even firepower by itself. It was the ability to adapt continuously under industrial warfare while the battlefield was still changing. History books often reduce this transformation to equipment, but the deeper reality was organizational psychology under pressure alone. And to understand why American infantry fought this way, we first have to understand how European armies still viewed warfare when the conflict began. Most European armies entered the Second World War carrying ghosts from the trenches of 1914. Their officer corps had been shaped by mass casualties, collapsing fronts, and the brutal mathematics of attritional warfare. Even when technology improved, institutional thinking often remained cautious, centralized, and rigid. Infantry doctrine across Europe frequently depended on officers controlling movement from above. Orders traveled downward slowly. Large formations attacked along predictable axes. Battlefield initiative stayed concentrated near senior command structures because many armies feared disorder more than hesitation. Germany modernized operational maneuver better than most. Blitzkrieg shocked the world because German armored formations moved faster and coordinated more aggressively than their opponents. But beneath that innovation, many infantry formations still carried traditional habits. Tactical flexibility existed, yet authority remained heavily centralized compared to what would later emerge inside the American system. The United States entered the war differently. America arrived later, less psychologically chained to the trenches of the First World War and backed by an industrial economy capable of constant expansion. The U.S. Army increasingly built doctrine around movement, communication, and integration rather than sheer infantry mass alone. Radios reached lower battlefield levels. Trucks transformed mobility. Mechanization reduced exhaustion. Artillery became faster to coordinate. Junior officers and non-commissioned leaders received greater battlefield responsibility than many European systems traditionally allowed. Most importantly, American infantry increasingly operated as battlefield coordinators connected to larger support networks. They did not simply advance. They directed firepower. European armies often moved infantry first and support second. The Americans increasingly moved everything together: armor, artillery, engineers, logistics, reconnaissance, and infantry pushed forward as parts of one connected industrial structure. By 1944, this distinction became devastating. German defenders were no longer confronting isolated rifle companies. They were confronting constantly reinforced battlefield systems capable of adapting while combat was still unfolding. American planners viewed logistics differently from many European staffs. Supply movement was not treated as secondary labor behind the front. It became part of combat design itself. Fuel, ammunition, replacement troops, field hospitals, repair crews, and transport columns were expected to move beside advancing formations. This created infantry forces that could recover faster, maneuver longer, and sustain pressure without collapsing into exhaustion. The first encounters between American infantry and experienced German forces did not inspire fear inside the Wehrmacht. In North Africa, many German officers viewed the newly arrived Americans as inexperienced, overly confident, and dangerously dependent on equipment. Early U.S. battlefield coordination often appeared clumsy. Units became separated. Attacks stalled under pressure. Inexperienced formations sometimes advanced too directly into prepared defenses and paid heavily for it. To German commanders, shaped by years of war across Europe, the conclusion initially seemed obvious. The Americans were amateurs with resources. But this is the part history books often ignore. Something unusual began happening after those early defeats. American units adapted with alarming speed. In Tunisia, Sicily, and later Italy, battlefield behavior started changing from campaign to campaign. Squad leaders adjusted maneuver tactics. Patrol patterns became less predictable. Artillery coordination improved dramatically. Infantry spacing widened. Junior officers increasingly improvised under pressure instead of waiting for rigid centralized approval. German officers began noticing that American tactical behavior changed alarmingly fast. Units damaged 1 month, returned later with entirely different battlefield patterns. The battlefield itself was becoming a learning system. This created a psychological problem Germany did not fully expect. Many European military traditions still depended on doctrine moving slowly through layers of hierarchy. Tactical culture often changed cautiously because armies feared disorder, contradiction, and loss of command authority. The American system evolved differently. Decentralized leadership allowed adaptation to spread faster at lower levels. Officers studied after-action reports aggressively. Battlefield mistakes became institutional lessons instead of permanent habits. Communication networks distributed observations rapidly across formations. Logistics systems replaced damaged equipment quickly enough for units to continue experimenting under combat conditions. Most importantly, American infantry formations rarely fought in isolation from the larger military machines supporting them. Replacement systems restored manpower. Truck networks maintained mobility. Expanding radio coordination accelerated artillery response times. Combat engineers adjusted routes and crossings as conditions shifted. Information moved faster through the American system than many German commanders initially realized. The U.S. Army was evolving during combat at industrial speed. Every engagement generated new data, new tactical adjustments, and new coordination methods. Mistakes that crippled other armies for entire campaigns were sometimes corrected by American formations within weeks, creating an opponent that became harder to predict after every engagement. Eventually, even German battlefield reports began admitting something deeply uncomfortable. After Normandy, German battlefield reports began describing American infantry in language that sounded increasingly uneasy. The problem was no longer inexperience. The problem was unpredictability. German commanders understood traditional European assaults. They understood concentrated pressure, narrow breakthroughs, and infantry waves tied closely to rigid operational schedules. But American formations often behaved differently once combat intensified. Small units maneuvered aggressively without waiting for perfect battlefield conditions. Rifle squads shifted positions rapidly through fields, forests, and shattered villages while maintaining constant artillery communication. Front lines that appeared stable suddenly collapsed beneath coordinated fire, arriving with terrifying speed. German veterans repeatedly described the same frustration. American infantry rarely attacked alone. Wide battlefield spacing made defensive targeting harder. Local counterattacks often struck empty ground because American units had already repositioned somewhere else. One platoon fixed defenders in place, while another moved around hedgerows, roads, or wooded terrain searching for weak points. Then artillery arrived before German forces could reorganize properly. Not later, almost immediately. The communication shock became one of the defining psychological realities of the Western Front. American infantry squads could coordinate with artillery, armor, engineers, and sometimes even air support faster than many European officers believed possible under battlefield conditions. The German army did not merely face American soldiers. It faced an entire moving industrial network attached to each platoon. This distinction changed the character of combat itself. German units could still win local engagements, They could inflict casualties, delay advances, and occasionally destroy exposed formations. Yet operational control continued slipping away because American systems absorbed disruption faster than expected. Damaged units reorganized. Artillery batteries remained active. Supply vehicles kept moving. Fresh infantry appeared behind the line. Pressure never fully disappeared. German veterans later admitted they often feared American artillery coordination more than the infantry assault itself. The shells arrived quickly, accurately, and repeatedly, turning defensive recovery into psychological exhaustion. Positions that survived one engagement frequently faced another before proper reorganization became possible. This is the part many simplified histories fail to explain. The American infantry advance became dangerous because firepower moved with it continuously. The rifleman was only the visible edge of a much larger battlefield system operating behind him. American attacks therefore created a strange contradiction inside German command thinking. Tactical victories no longer guaranteed operational stability. Defenders might hold a crossroads, only to discover by nightfall that neighboring sectors had collapsed under coordinated pressure. The battlefield stopped behaving like the wars Germany had studied before 1939. It became fluid, connected, and relentlessly adaptive under pressure from multiple directions. German commanders found this psychologically unsettling, but the deeper military reality went even further than battlefield movement alone, because American doctrine increasingly rested on an assumption many armies still resisted completely. The deeper reality behind American infantry doctrine was not simply technology, training, or industrial wealth. It was a different understanding of what infantry was supposed to accomplish in modern war. Many European armies entered the 20th century accepting catastrophic infantry losses as unavoidable. Men were expected to hold ground until destroyed, attack until exhausted, and continue advancing long after operational effectiveness had collapsed. Heroism often became tied to endurance under hopeless conditions. The American approach evolved differently during World War II. American doctrine increasingly emphasized preserving combat effectiveness instead of glorifying battlefield sacrifice. Infantry advances relied heavily on suppressive fire, artillery preparation, coordinated movement, mechanized support, and flanking pressure designed to reduce unnecessary losses before direct assaults even began. Tactical withdrawal, when necessary, was not automatically viewed as weakness. Repositioning to preserve operational capability could be considered strategically intelligent rather than dishonorable. This was not softness, it was industrial battlefield mathematics. A living infantry force could continue advancing tomorrow. A destroyed one could not. This distinction shaped nearly every level of American battlefield behavior. U.S. planners increasingly viewed infantry as part of a long-term operational system that needed to survive repeated engagements without collapsing physically or psychologically. Logistics therefore became inseparable from combat itself. Truck convoys maintained ammunition flow close to advancing formations. Food supply reduced physical exhaustion. Engineering units repaired roads, cleared obstacles, and sustained mobility across damaged terrain. Casualty evacuation systems removed wounded soldiers faster than many armies could manage earlier in the war, strengthening morale because troops knew injury did not automatically mean abandonment. The American soldier often fought with the confidence that the system itself was moving beside him. That psychological difference mattered enormously. European armies frequently advanced into exhaustion. American forces advanced with replenishment. Fuel arrived, artillery ammunition arrived, replacement troops arrived, repair crews arrived, communication systems remained active. This did not eliminate fear or suffering. American infantry still endured horrific combat across Normandy, Italy, the Ardennes, and countless smaller engagements. But the surrounding military structure increasingly worked to prevent battlefield collapse before it spread through entire formations. That hidden truth changed the rhythm of combat. German and Soviet offensives often depended on overwhelming momentum sustained through immense human cost. American offensives increasingly depended on maintaining coordinated pressure while minimizing operational breakdown inside advancing units. This allowed American formations to recover faster after setbacks. Damaged battalions reorganized more efficiently, Supply systems restored mobility before paralysis became permanent. Infantry therefore maintained offensive capability longer across extended campaigns. The result was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was something far more dangerous. American battlefield power became sustainable. And once that system reached full maturity by late 1944, the tactical battlefield itself began changing shape. Defenders no longer faced isolated infantry assaults moving beyond support range. They faced interconnected formations advancing with artillery, logistics, engineers, transportation, communications, and mechanized reinforcement functioning almost continuously behind them. The battlefield became harder to interrupt, harder to exhaust, and increasingly difficult to stop entirely. By late 1944, American infantry no longer advanced according to the older battlefield rhythms that had dominated Europe for generations. The change was not cosmetic. It altered how pressure moved across the battlefield itself. Traditional infantry assaults often depended on concentrated formations pushing directly into enemy defenses. Dense movement created momentum, but it also created predictable targets. American doctrine increasingly rejected that pattern whenever possible. Instead, U.S. forces relied on fire and maneuver warfare operating through layered coordination. One unit fixed defenders in place with suppressive fire. Another maneuvered around exposed terrain. Artillery disrupted retreat routes behind enemy positions. Armor forced defenders to reposition under pressure. Engineers cleared mines, repaired crossings, and maintained mobility corridors. Air power isolated reinforcements before they could stabilize collapsing sectors. The battlefield became interconnected. American squad spacing widened dramatically compared to many earlier European formations. Riflemen moved farther apart, reducing vulnerability to machine guns and artillery concentration. Junior leaders exercised more tactical initiative at lower levels, allowing units to react faster when terrain or resistance changed unexpectedly. Radio flexibility transformed this system even further. Frontline infantry could coordinate artillery strikes rapidly enough to keep pressure moving continuously. Smoke rounds concealed maneuver elements. Armored infantry cooperation allowed tanks and rifle squads to support one another dynamically instead of operating in isolation. Engineering support prevented stalled momentum from turning into operational paralysis. The Normandy breakout revealed how dangerous this system could become once American coordination matured fully. German defensive positions that survived initial assaults often discovered neighboring sectors collapsing under combined pressure from artillery, armor, and mobile infantry maneuver. Front lines stopped behaving like static barriers and became fluid zones of continuous disruption. The lessons of the Hurtgen Forest reinforced this transformation brutally. Dense terrain exposed the limits of frontal pressure against fortified defenses. American commanders learned painful lessons about coordination, artillery effectiveness, and mobility constraints under extreme battlefield conditions. Those lessons later strengthened operational flexibility during the Ardennes recovery after Germany launched its final major offensive in the West. This is the deeper irony. Hollywood rarely captures American infantry advances often. Appeared less cinematic because the U.S. Army increasingly tried to avoid dramatic frontal heroics whenever alternatives existed. Tactical efficiency mattered more than spectacle. Coordinated firepower mattered more than symbolic charges. The objective was not to create legendary moments. The objective was to keep advancing without operational collapse. That philosophy made American battlefield movement appear methodical, compared to the dramatic imagery many audiences associate with war. But strategically, it created formations that became extremely difficult to stop once momentum developed. German commanders repeatedly discovered that defeating one attacking element rarely ended the assault itself. Another formation was often already maneuvering somewhere else while artillery and logistics systems remained active behind the front. American combat power therefore became cumulative pressure, built continuously across sectors instead of relying on single decisive breakthroughs alone. And this is where one of the most popular myths about World War II begins collapsing completely. For decades, one explanation has dominated discussions about American victory in World War II. America won because it had more factories, more fuel, more trucks, more weapons. But this explanation collapses under serious examination. Industrial power alone cannot teach infantry how to maneuver under fire. Factories do not automatically create battlefield flexibility. Communication discipline, decentralized initiative, or effective coordination between artillery, armor, engineers, and frontline rifle squads. Many nations possessed brave soldiers. Many possessed capable equipment. What separated the United States by late war was not wealth alone. It was the ability to integrate systems at a scale few other armies could sustain under combat pressure. Germany often possessed tactical brilliance without sustainable logistics. Its armored offensives repeatedly outran supply capacity. Operational skill collided constantly with fuel shortages, transport limitations, and strategic exhaustion. The Soviet Union possessed immense endurance through catastrophic sacrifice. Soviet armies absorbed punishment on a scale almost unimaginable, but often through losses that would have shattered many other military systems entirely. America increasingly fused mobility, production, coordination, communication, and force preservation together into one continuously functioning battlefield structure. That distinction mattered enormously. American infantry did not simply advance with superior equipment. It advanced with repair crews, fuel systems, replacement networks, artillery coordination, engineering support, and mobile communications operating simultaneously behind the front line. The battlefield became less dependent on isolated heroics and more dependent on organizational continuity under pressure. This created something rare in industrial warfare: a sustainable offensive capability. American formations could recover faster after setbacks, redistribute resources more efficiently, and maintain operational tempo longer than enemies expected. Tactical losses that might cripple other armies often became temporary disruptions inside a larger functioning system. This is the hidden truth many simplified histories ignore. American infantry effectiveness was not accidental wealth. It was organizational warfare at scale. Factories mattered because they supported adaptation. Logistics mattered because they sustained maneuver. Communications mattered because they accelerated battlefield decision-making faster than many opponents could respond. The myth therefore collapses completely once the deeper pattern becomes visible. America did not merely overwhelm the battlefield materially. It reorganized how modern industrial warfare functioned operationally. And behind the statistics, vehicle counts, and artillery totals, another effect was spreading quietly through German defensive lines. A psychological realization far more dangerous than the numbers themselves. By late 1944, the psychological burden facing German defenders extended far beyond fear of direct combat. What exhausted many frontline units was the growing realization that the American battlefield system rarely stopped functioning. Day and night, roads behind Allied lines remained crowded with movement. Trucks carried ammunition forward while wounded soldiers moved back toward field hospitals. Fuel convoys rolled continuously through rain, mud, and shattered villages. Fresh infantry arrived behind exhausted formations while damaged. Vehicles disappeared for repair and returned. Again days later, the battlefield never seemed to go. Silent, German veterans repeatedly described the same unsettling rhythm. Nighttime engine noise, artillery, flashes without pause, convoys, stretching across roads long after dark, radio, traffic continuing constantly behind the front. Even after local victories, American pressure returned faster than expected. Positions captured at heavy cost were often attacked again before German defenders could reorganize properly. Units that believed they had disrupted Allied momentum discovered artillery batteries still firing, supply routes still functioning, and new infantry already approaching the line. The fear was not simply American soldiers. It was the realization that the American battlefield machine absorbed disruption without collapsing. This created deep psychological exhaustion inside German defensive systems. Traditional military assumptions depended partly on breaking enemy momentum through attrition, confusion, or logistical paralysis. But American formations repeatedly restored operational continuity before those effects became decisive. German intelligence failures worsened the shock dramatically. Before the war, many German leaders viewed the United States through outdated cultural stereotypes. America was often perceived as commercial, soft, materialistic, and strategically unserious. Industrial wealth existed, but many underestimated the military adaptability hiding behind it. Reality became psychologically devastating. American society did not merely produce equipment at enormous scale. It produced systems capable of learning, reorganizing, replacing losses, and sustaining operational pressure continuously across enormous distances. That realization spread slowly through German command structures as the war progressed westward into France and beyond. Defensive victories became temporary. Tactical successes failed to halt operational momentum. Every delay seemed followed by more artillery, more trucks, more fuel, and more infantry appearing somewhere else along the line. The deeper fear, therefore, was not annihilation in one battle. It was exhaustion against a system that appeared capable of fighting indefinitely. And eventually, one final realization made the truth impossible for German commanders to deny completely. By the final year of the war in Western Europe, German commanders increasingly realized they were no longer fighting isolated offensives. They were fighting operational momentum itself. This became the final proof. Even after heavy combat, American formations continued moving forward with disturbing consistency. Fuel shortages that crippled German mobility rarely halted Allied advances for long. Artillery batteries remained active after engagements that should have disrupted coordination. Infantry divisions absorbed casualties, reorganized, and returned to combat faster than many German staffs considered possible under sustained battlefield pressure. The system kept functioning. That was the decisive difference. During the Ardennes offensive, Germany achieved surprise and temporary disruption across large sectors of the front. But even there, American recovery revealed the deeper reality of the war. Roads reopened. Supply columns resumed movement. Reinforcements arrived. Damaged command structures restored communication. Air support returned when weather conditions improved. Operational continuity survived shock. German commanders increasingly understood that tactical success alone no longer guaranteed strategic opportunity. American battlefield systems absorbed disruption faster than the Wehrmacht could exploit it. Local breakthroughs failed to produce lasting collapse because the Allied structure surrounding frontline infantry remained active under enormous pressure. After the war, many German officers privately acknowledged this reality with remarkable consistency. American military strength was not simply industrial volume. It was coordination, flexibility, mobility, sustained. Logistical integration operating continuously across the battlefield. The American infantryman therefore fought differently because he existed inside a military ecosystem, specifically designed for continuous offensive endurance. This was not old European warfare based primarily on isolated formations exhausting themselves through repeated frontal struggle. It was modern systems warfare emerging in real time. Infantry, artillery, engineering support, logistics, mechanization, communications, and industrial production no longer functioned as separate military categories. They operated together as one interconnected battlefield, structure capable of learning and adapting while combat itself continued. That realization slowly destroyed the assumptions Germany carried into the war. The Wehrmacht had mastered operational maneuver for the early 20th century, but by 1945, America was demonstrating something newer, a form of industrial battlefield coordination designed not merely to win battles, but to sustain offensive pressure continuously across entire campaigns without operational collapse. And in the end, the lesson of American infantry during World War II became much larger than battlefield tactics alone. American infantry did not advance differently because its soldiers lacked courage. Across Normandy, Italy, the Ardennes, and the shattered towns of Western Europe, American soldiers displayed extraordinary courage under conditions few modern generations can fully imagine. Men crossed open fields under machine gun fire, fought through freezing forests, endured artillery bombardment for days, and continued advancing despite exhaustion, fear, and devastating losses. But courage alone was never the true revolution. The deeper transformation was building a military system designed to help courage survive longer on the modern battlefield. System where mobility mattered, adaptation mattered, communication mattered, logistics mattered, preserving combat effectiveness mattered. World War II exposed something larger than national strength alone. It revealed the future direction of industrial warfare itself. Victory no longer depended only on isolated battlefield heroics or symbolic sacrifice. It increasingly depended on coordinated systems capable of learning, recovering, and sustaining operational pressure faster than the enemy could adapt. That was the hidden shift unfolding behind the American advance across Europe. The infantry rifleman remained central to the battlefield, but he no longer fought as an isolated figure abandoned to exhaustion once combat began. He fought inside a constantly moving structure of artillery networks, engineering units, radio coordination, transportation systems, medical evacuation routes, fuel convoys, and industrial production stretching across an ocean. The American infantryman did not walk across Europe alone. He advanced with factories, radios, engineers, truck convoys, artillery networks, and an entire industrial civilization moving beside him. And once German commanders fully understood that reality, the psychological balance of the war began changing. Permanently, because defeating individual units no longer stopped the larger machine behind them. Roads reopened. Supplies returned. Artillery resumed firing. Fresh formations appeared. The system absorbed damage and kept moving forward. And once the enemy understood that, the outcome of the war became far harder to stop. History often remembers the explosions, the tanks, and the dramatic charges. But modern wars are frequently decided by something quieter. The systems capable of learning faster than the men trying to destroy them.